Signore? Signore?
While there are still people like Sorrentino carrying the torch for modern Italian cinema, it is a far cry from the artistic heights that it reached in the 40s, 60s, or 70s. For a few decades now, it has been on a steady decline with a lot less prolific working directors and a lot less genre variety, as genres like the giallos, spaghetti westerns, poliziotteschi largely aren't around anymore. However, one of my favorite recent releases has been a film by an Italian filmmaker that stars Josh O'Connor, but it's not the Italian filmmaker you're probably thinking of, and it's not the film that you're thinking of either. The one I'm talking about is a 2023 release called La Chimera by Alice Rohrwacher, which has already garnered a lot of critical praise as one of the best modern Italian films, and Josh O'Connor's performance has been praised as one of his very best. But the question remains, why?
L'antico sogno collettivo dei campagnoli poveri, trovare un tesoro, un passaporto sepolto per fuoriuscire dalla povertà. Qualche altro invece è soltanto vittima della brama di ricchezze che affligge l'umanità, e si arriva in questi casi facilmente alla scelleratezza.
The film tells the story of Arthur, an Englishman living in Italy who has just been released from prison, and structurally the film is pretty reliant on this mystery. Questions like why he's in prison in the first place or what is he doing in Italy to keep the audience engaged throughout the first act, as the film sets up all the important facts about him, such as the fact that his love Beniamina is missing and has been for a very long time, or the fact that Arthur has a supernatural talent for finding old Etruscan gravesites, which he raids with his tamburoli, a posse of grave robbers.
È un caffone!
Dici così perché già sei innamorata?
E se lo fossi? Me lo consigliate?
Noi glielo consiglieremmo pure, però lui le ragazze non le guarda più, perché pensa soltanto alla sua, che non c'è più.
All of this builds up to the real emotional crux of the film, which is the aforementioned disappearance of Beniamina. But as this clip alludes, it is later confirmed that she's indeed dead. And whereas the Tamburoli raid the tombs for money, Arthur is haunted by the idea of finding her again, finding a gateway to the underworld in one of these tombs. This pursuit has some pretty direct allusions to the myth of Orpheus, who famously went on a journey to the underworld in order to save his lost love Eurydice, much as Arthur is doing in this film. And although Arthur's talent of finding these tombs is of a supernatural nature and the film flirts with magical realism, there is no indication in it that such a gate really exists. What the search really is about is Arthur's grief and deep longing for the one he has lost. One way this plays out through the film is the act of tomb robbing being a coping mechanism of sorts. Arthur is a completely broken man. It is made abundantly clear that Arthur doesn't want money initially, he doesn't even want to reconnect with his Tamburoli, but he does because he simply has nothing else to do. All the grave robbing does is fill the void that has been left inside of Arthur after Beniamina's passing, and only temporarily. Even when Arthur appears to have found a new purpose in life and gives up this pursuit, he can't help but get drawn back into it because it's the only thing that he knows how to do. The only thing that can make him forget for a little while. Another way is the recurring theme in the film of the connection between the past and the present. Arthur is quite literally digging up the past each time that he breaks into these Etruscan tombs, excavating and reliving those memories of Beniamina that we sometimes see in the film, memories that he can't let go. A very similar fate befalls Beniamina's mother, who is also stuck in the past and refuses to believe that her daughter is really dead. And much like Arthur, who wanders physical remnants of the past, the tombs, Beniamina's mother lives in an old, decrepit house that's quite literally falling apart. A different physical embodiment of the past and her inability to let go and move on.
Lui dell'archeologia fu spasimante, non la sposò e ora contrabbanda. Quel che scavando danno i sottosuoli, a lui e ai suoi amici gli altri tombaroli.
Stylistically, the film has garnered quite a lot of comparisons to Federico Fellini, and these comparisons are very apt. There are a lot of carnivals and over-the-top eccentric celebrations with a lot of characters involved, which are the cornerstone of the Fellini-esque. However, it even utilizes Fellini's trademark fourth wall break, and has some other absurd elements like sped-up sequences akin to silent film era slapstick, or a utilization of a lot of different film stocks, all of which are quite absurd elements that notably call attention to themselves. They make the audience aware that the film is doing something that's breaking reality and expectations, which is very Fellini-esque. But I'd also argue that there's a connection to the other Italian filmmaking great in the film, Michelangelo Antonioni, in particular his film Red Desert. A lot of imagery in that film is centered around the encroaching industrialization of the land and juxtapositions of natural phenomena with these gargantuan human-made technological behemoths. And tonally, a lot of melancholy and loneliness that drives the film is derived from how isolating and alien this industrial world is. In La Chimera, a very similar clash plays out visually. Instead of being about industrialization, it's more about the same idea of past and present, and the modernity that is encroaching upon the land. Arthur and his Tamburoli never find themselves in the big city, but there are images of them finding tombs just outside of one. Images of Arthur wistfully staring out at skyscrapers that loom over the landscape in the far distance, one of which seems incredibly reminiscent to some shots from Red Desert. When you don't see modernity encroach, you see things like Arthur living by the ancient city wall and his house getting torn down for reasons that are never outwardly explained, but one can pretty easily guess that somebody simply wants to prepare the wall for something better, something new. Characters of Red Desert find themselves unable to live in the new modern world that's clearly eating away at Arthur as well. One reason being the fact that he's still trying to hold on to the past, and another is that the world is simply passing him by.
Il prezzo.
Another way this clash between the past and the present and the encroaching modernity plays out is through the film's commentary on Italy. Seeing as I'm not Italian, I'm very much not the best person to speak on this, but there are some obvious allusions to the Italian past, to the point where one of the characters is even named Italia. One element of this is also the commentary on capitalism and how the greed of the Tamburoli is portrayed in the film. The director Alici said that in the movie she wanted to create an image of what capitalism is to her, and that image is a bunch of dogs growling at each other and fighting with each other, where the small dog and the big dog are all the same. It's quite a surreal sequence in the film itself, but the way it plays out gets the point across, particularly through the schism that this capitalism drives between Arthur and his friends. Since I mentioned Josh O'Connor as a pretty big sell for seeing this movie, this would be a good point to mention that this film simply wouldn't work without his performance. Unlike films such as Red Desert, which set a melancholic tone by creating images that utilize visual patterns such as contrast or lots of negative space to isolate the characters, or films like Fellini's La Dolce Vita, which place a heavy narrative focus on the ennui and create a similar tone of isolation, loneliness, and sadness, La Chimera is incredibly reliant on O'Connor for the same effect. There are barely any scenes that don't feature him at all, and the story is even told in a stream of consciousness style, from his perspective, which is indicated by these memory sequences that only he would know. And because the character doesn't talk a lot either, O'Connor has to create an image of someone who used to be a bit charismatic, someone who has a lot of mystery to him, but also someone who's now just a shell of a person, a ghastly troubled wanderer who also travels around the human plane without any real purpose. And O'Connor does a tremendous job at this. He's able to convey an incredible range of emotions through his eyes alone, his most definitive trait as an actor. He's given ample close-ups by Alici to utilize them and convey the grief and the longing that the character cannot escape. The physicality of the performance also shouldn't be understated, be it bursts of anger or rolling around in pain, or how O'Connor slouches his shoulders and it almost seems like his entire posture reflects the internal world of the character. Both the mystique, the melancholy, and the shadow of a former self, all conveyed through performance. The final layer to the story appears as it wraps up, which is Arthur finding himself in the tombs that he raids, discovering aspects of his fractured mind in the past. After the first tomb, he finds this bell and forms a connection with Italia, a love interest who works for Flora. After the second tomb, he discovers the weight of looting these places and sabotages his posse's attempts at earning a lot of money by throwing away a head of a statue that he found. And at the third tomb, the story arrives at the only natural conclusion that it realistically could have. Everything from the very start indicated Arthur is a doomed, fractured man who only wanders the world in order to find his long-lost love. And in the third tomb, he finally finds the gate that he was looking for.
Salta giù Arthur.
Zoppa,
Perché io?
perché a te l'onore, sei tu che l'hai trovata. Noi funzioniamo così.
Tranquillo.
After he splits away from his posse, Arthur briefly reconnects with Italia, and it seems that perhaps he will be able to reattach himself back to the world of the living. But in the end, he yet again turns to tomb raiding and goes on another raid with a different group of Tamburoli. And something that a ghost had said earlier to him in the film is finally put into context.
Scusi,
È lei?
un accendino per favore.
Tenga pure, le potrebbe servire. Già che siamo qui, volevo chiederle, non è che per caso sa dove è finito il mio corredo?
Cosa?
Il mio corredo funebre.
Set up by the person he was supplying the stolen art to, Arthur is buried alive in a tomb. Using a lighter that he got from a ghost, he starts to explore it and finds a string that we've previously seen associated with Beniamina in one of his memories. And as Arthur presumably dies, the two are finally reunited in the underworld. Arthur's character arc is complete on a very bittersweet note. Somewhat understandably, the film isn't some massive world-shaking hit. The narrative does set up compelling mysteries, but it isn't the most engaging thing out there. And Alici has even stated that she knew the film would be challenging for some audiences. Yet the film has a ton of personality. It calls upon the Italian cinema greats in very effective ways. It features an incredible lead performance that elevates the whole film, and has quite a lot of symbolism to dig into, from allusions to mythology to the connections between past and present, to Italy itself. It's grand and ambitious, everything that a creative film should be. And for me, it's one of the best modern Italian films out there, and hopefully one of many more to come.